More of the industry weighs in on revenue splits. CD Projekt Red seemingly have larger than previously thought plans. Sony seem to be striking out in a bold fashion for next gen, and far more. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Roundup, our Tuesday and Friday news show that keeps you up to date with the industry goings on. There's a lot to talk about today, so let's get right into it. Our first story is a little bit more on the distribution side of the games industry. And yeah, that does mean we're going to touch on Epic. So, Frederick Wester, the executive chairman of Paradox Interactive, spoke at GameLab about revenue splits in general, and then a little bit on Epic specifically. He said this, quote, "The 70-30 revenue split is outrageous. I think the platform holders are taking too much money. Everyone in the press here, just quote me on that." So 70-30 has been standard for a very long time indeed, starting, as Wester says, with Warner Brothers in the 70s, who would charge 30% for distributing VHS tapes. And of course he points out that, well, that's, distributing VHSs, that's pretty expensive as compared to digital distribution. To which he says, this doesn't cost anything, so Epic has done a great job for the whole industry because you get 88%, fantastic move, thank you very much. Now, that last bit is what will get him a little bit of ire from a lot of people who play games, largely down to Epic Games' aggression. And I think just about everyone will agree that it's a good idea for middlemen to be getting a bit of a smaller cut. Indeed, a fellow game developer at the GameLab panel said that the 30% store cut will often be more than the developer's profit, and I think we can all agree that in principle, the developer is doing more work than the storefront. They, along with the publisher, who will normally be funding much of development, which is pretty important, and also doing additional things like localization, QA, and sometimes even support development or porting, I think that, yeah, the dev and the publisher do deserve a larger cut than, the store who is doing some payment processing and providing you a digital file. And when I say publisher, I especially mean that in the indie realm. I think a lot of us get maybe the AAA publishing and indie confused a bit, which is fair enough, but they actually end up being quite different. But of course, this 88-12 split, that's not a controversial thing, from what I understand with, with players of games. I think it's the exclusives. It's all the exclusives, and Frederick didn't really talk about that. And that's kind of the problem here. I think an 88-12 split is great. As a consumer, I want a higher percentage of my money going to the people who actually created the thing that I'm buying, and that's why so many people are deciding to purchase, say, Cyberpunk 2077 from GOG, because GOG is also a part of CD Projekt Red. So really, that's the thing. If Epic was an 88-12 split and nothing else, then it would be a good thing, but it's not only that. Epic are damaging the customer experience through their exclusives. Now, based on what Tim Sweeney has said, their 2020 exclusive lineup is going to feature more games that they've actually funded the development of from an early stage, which I think is a little bit more reasonable. You pay for a game, maybe an exclusive is more okay there, or you pay for development of a game from scratch, but nabbing crowdfunded games late in the day, that's just not on, and yeah, I don't think that should be supported as a practice. Now, Frederick went on to clarify his points further on Twitter, saying that he wasn't only pointing the finger at Steam, who have actually changed their revenue splits somewhat. They now have a 25 and 20% tier, which is really only for high revenue games. It doesn't really hit indies, unfortunately. But yeah, so he said that, but really what he is targeting is the 70-30 general practice. And he went on to say this, and while we're discussing the fairness of revenue splits, who can blame developers going Epic exclusive if given a great revenue split plus guarantee? We're not planning to do any exclusives, but geez, show understanding for those who do. Ask yourself, why do they choose to go exclusive? I'll give you a hint. It's not to mess up your life and force you to use multiple launchers. And I think really he's getting onto a pretty simple point there. Indies are often cash strapped, and, it's they need the revenue in, and I suppose it's the security that really will make people go with an Epic exclusive if they have that choice. Once more, I think it's about different perspectives. Customers and developers just have to deal with different problems. And I mean, from my perspective, if when we're releasing a game, I want it to be on as many storefronts as is possible so that people have choice. You want to buy it DRM free in GOG? Go ahead. You want to buy it, I don't know, so we get a slightly higher cut on Epic? Sure. If you want all your Steam features, buy it in Steam. From my perspective, I just want to be able to put our stuff on as many stores as we can and just give consumers the choice. And certainly if we were to do that and it was on multiple stores, I think I'd be happy enough to show like some numbers and like the split between stores. I think you guys would find that interesting. But yeah, I think it really does just come down to different perspectives. From a developer's perspective, a lot of that stuff makes a bit more sense. But from a consumer's perspective, it's like, yeah, I don't like having multiple launchers. It's a bit of a pain in the ass, especially when one of them is pretty darn rubbish. So yeah, it's all unfortunate, and I hope we get past this awkward period a lot faster than we seem to be. Fundamentally, I'm okay with exclusives if it is on a platform that the company who are doing the exclusives have built. I'm okay with Microsoft and Sony having their exclusives. But when it's just a software platform and it's just paying to not put a game somewhere else, you know, you're literally paying a publisher not to publish their game. I mean, come on, it's obviously a bad thing for customers. Then next, we've got a quick update from Projekt Red. Now, this is from a Polish interview, and basically they said that overall they have 5 teams, and that 3 of those teams are working on Cyberpunk-related titles. There's Cyberpunk 2077, and then there is their next big game that they say is big and innovative, and I believe a 2021 release, which, I mean, I saw in the interview and I thought 2021, that seems a bit ambitious, but supposedly they have another major title in the Cyberpunk universe. It could be that that is a game that is maybe piggybacking off a lot of the work done for 2077, and that there is then also a rumored standalone Cyberpunk multiplayer game that they talked about as well. So overall, what does this show us? Well, they're really committing pretty hard on Cyberpunk, and going through the interview, they talked about how Cyberpunk pre-orders were doing super well. And then, of course, some of those pre-orders are also happening on GOG, which means that they will get 100% of the revenue. So overall, it seems to be a very rosy picture for CD Projekt Red indeed. They pretty much have widespread love from people who actually play games, and it all seems to be going well. They're certainly investing very heavily in this. It seems to actually be tracking somewhat above The Witcher 3. They did say that pre-orders were tracking above Witcher 3 and that they're feeling better about that. So it certainly will be an interesting period of time for the studio. Then next up, we've got a less happy story, G2a. So, the grey market key reseller G2a is no stranger to controversy, having been in the headlines before, facing off against TinyBuild, and having to deal with a Gearbox deal falling through, as well as drawing the ire of Total Biscuit, Level Cap, many other YouTubers, and they're once again under fire thanks to Mike Rose, the founder of publisher No More Robots. Now, upon a Google search for Descenders, one of the games that they publish, he found sponsored G2a ads at the top of that list, and he explained that neither publisher nor studio gets any money from the G2a sales, and that players should pirate their games instead of going to G2a. The developers of Descenders, Rage Squid, backed him up in this, retweeting his initial outburst and adding, "Please torrent our games instead of buying them on G2a." Amongst others, Vlambeer's Rami Ismail threw his 2 cents in, adding that key resellers can potentially cost developers time in dealing with fake key requests and then credit card chargebacks, which is really something that happened in that TinyBuild story, which was very damaging to them. Now, to briefly explain the issue with their business model, they allow for third parties to sell keys through their site. Now, that's fine in theory, and even good for consumer freedom, but key reselling sites have issues with stolen keys. So, stolen credit cards are used to purchase large numbers of game keys from a developer's website, then those keys are resold on the likes of G2a for greatly reduced prices. Then later, when the credit card companies issue chargebacks for the fraudulent purchases, the developer takes a massive financial hit because of the fees involved. G2a are well aware that this happens, and historically, they've let it happen. Now, they used to offer something called G2a Shield, which was a subscription service that basically they pressured you into purchasing alongside game keys. Now, this service would, amongst other benefits, protect your purchases for a few dollars a month, so if you received a key that did not work or got revoked, they'd give you a free replacement. And the fact that that is one of its selling points is a clear admission that they know they might or probably are selling stolen goods. Now, they offer G2a Plus instead of Shield these days, but it's pretty much similar benefits but rebranded. If this wasn't shady enough, there are many posts across the internet of people unaware they were signed up to G2a Shield and couldn't figure out how to unsubscribe. And really, this is all just behavior that G2a willfully engaged in. They are really bad actors. Now, despite this, they've defended themselves as a legitimate business, and they've made moves to improve their reputation, including G2a Direct, which allows developers to sell keys keys directly through G2a, although that does not seem to have landed very well, and personally as a developer, I would never put our games on anything that would give G2a profit, and yeah, please pirate anything we do instead of G2a. Now, the main draw is still selling keys for cheaper on G2a, and the thing is, that's still in many cases accomplished through fraud, and that stuff is way larger scale than you'd think. Mike Rose brought up one last point. G2a apparently prepared statements for their sponsored streamers and influencers to give after his tweets. They've historically leveraged streamers and YouTubers to strong effect, offering discount codes, using trusted names and faces to legitimize themselves and get users in the door. There are plenty who receive a paycheck from them and either don't understand or care about the ill effects that G2a have on the industry, and I think it's pretty irresponsible. I don't watch, like if I see somebody sponsored by G2a, I avoid their content. They are basically increasing the amount of fraud going on in our industry, and I would give a wide berth to anyone in the industry who unapologetically advertises for G2a. And then I'd also recommend, if you want an update on the 2016 story with them, check out Level Cap Gaming's video. It's great. He brought a lot of attention to this, and that really did sort of make waves, so I think it's really worth watching his video. Hopefully, though, this new wave of criticism inspires both the streamers and G2a to up their game a little bit, but I kind of doubt it. Sadly, there is money to be made in the grey market. Then next, Sony. So, Sony's next-gen strategy has been somewhat revealed by the Wall Street Journal. According to anonymous Sony officials, their chief executive, Kenichiro Yoshida, described the PS5 as a niche product aimed at hardcore gamers. They believe that visual quality is a key factor in purchase decisions, so they're aiming for 8K resolution and graphical quality to match. They are supposedly concentrating on large publishers and their internal AAA exclusives, largely ignoring smaller independent developers due to limited resources. In fact, they're actually not going to be showing indies off at Tokyo Game Show this year, despite that being a strong and consistent part of their marketing with the PS4. Now, this is not to say that the PS5 won't have indie games, but that Sony just won't be putting that much effort into reaching out to them, seemingly. It could be that this Wall Street Journal report is just getting, a slice of the pie, a part of the picture. Now, part of me wonders if they maybe saw the damage done to their brand by the overwhelming amount of indie games on their store. Maybe they felt like that was taking away emphasis from their sort of blockbuster offerings, perhaps, much like we saw with, Steam and the advent of Greenlight and Direct. That's not all for Sony, though, as Jim Ryan was interviewed by Nikkei, and he said they are considering mergers and acquisitions of game development companies because they believe that content is significantly more important now that Google and others are entering the industry. He says they have 25 years of experience in big assets, so they would be happy to welcome new companies entering the market with hope. That sounds good to me, right? With creativity and fresh ideas being bolstered by existing experience and resources. Sadly, though, if the Wall Street Journal sources are accurate, that might not be put to use in the indie realm. And overall, to me, it does just sound like a doubling down on what's worked for Sony in the past, and that is having super high quality blockbuster games like God of War, The Last of Us, and Uncharted. And then next, a few quick stories to round us off. So, reportedly, there's still 1 million people a month playing Age of Empires, and Microsoft have also said that they're not leaving Age of Mythology behind. Now, I think it was about 5 months ago I played Age of Empires 2 HD again, and it all came back to me, still a super fun game. And I think what's interesting to me about this is Age of Empires is not a game that you play for skins or a progression system or anything like that. You play it for entirely intrinsic reasons, not extrinsic ones, and it's nice to see a game like that still doing super well. I love that game when, that was one of the first games I ever played, was the Age of Empires series, and it's nice to see it still doing strong. And of course, we also recently had the news of Microsoft having a new studio be dedicated to Age of Empires. So as an RTS fan, that is extremely exciting news, and it's great to see that those games are still doing really well. Then next, I want to point out EVE Online. They have yet another very, very interesting story. So the Drifters are aliens. They initially could be sort of cheesed in the game with how you would deal with them, but well, CCP have done something rather surprising. They have started a full Drifter invasion of the galaxy, and this is to the point where multiple alliances, and when we talk about these alliances, you're dealing with thousands and thousands of players. EVE is just such a crazy game. I never really had the time to properly get into it, as much as I do like it a lot. But yeah, they've done this big in-game event where, and totally unannounced, they just commenced an alien invasion. One that is actually really strong, to the point where warring alliances have basically done truces. And it's just an extremely interesting event that shows really the power of a digital world and how you can do something completely transformative. I mean, our equivalent to that is, oh dear, the war has started, time for conscription. Right, that's the IRL equivalent of that. But in EVE, you have this universe that people have been playing in for years and years, so it feels real and important to them. And you can do something that just shakes the foundations of that. And just as a social experiment, that is tremendously interesting, and it's absolutely a story with EVE that I'm going to be keeping an eye on, especially because, sure, all the truces have happened now in game. But what happens whenever somebody decides to break their truce for a bit of gain? I'll be very interested indeed. And then finally, a slightly more personal story, Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord's multiplayer beta is a thing. Now, I love Mount & Blade Warband. Absolutely, I really enjoyed the Napoleonic multiplayer game they did as well, and just the modding scene in Warband is so rich. That game has taken so many hours of my life. But of course, it's basically a massive joke, Mount & Blade 2, how long it's taken them to make it. And just this is, I think, relevant news because there's actual playable stuff from it now, and it's seemingly coming along a lot faster. And I think what's interesting is just how much time, how many years they've put into this. And this really got me thinking about economics, because a development process like that, if you're based in Los Angeles, going to be a large problem. However, Tailworlds are a Turkish company, and that got me going down a little bit of a rabbit hole. So, 1 Turkish lira is about 20 cents in the US. So inspired by The Economist's, burger economy, Big Mac economy, basically it's not perfect, but you can kind of look at the price of a Big Mac in different countries, and it tells you a little bit about purchasing power, I suppose. So a quarter pounder with a Coke at McDonald's in Turkey costs 5.99 lira. That comes out to be about $1.20, or, £1 sterling, basically, in the UK. And I think that's very interesting. It does just go to show that when you're in a country with a lower cost of living, you're able to stretch out those development timelines a lot more, seemingly because you really just want to work on the quality of your product. And of course, what's another studio that does that quite notably? Projekt Red. They're in Poland, and certainly $1, it will have you go a lot further in Poland than it will in LA. And I suppose it does just make me wonder, why do more companies not just move out of LA to places that are cheaper? But anyway, it's nice to see Tailworlds stick with their game and seemingly be okay to not rush it out and just work on their vision. I cannot wait for Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord, and it's nice to see that there's more tangible parts of it coming out now. So there you go, that is it for today's episode of The Roundup. Apologies if I seemed a little bit delirious. I have quite the massive flu, and I'm going to flop over in a corner once this recording is done. So that'll be fun. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I will see you next time.